Loudly. Is that better?
Yep.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Louise. Hi. I'm with the Huntington's Disease Society of America. Raise your hand if you've heard about Huntington's disease. That is an incredibly large percentage of the population, which means that you're clearly in rare disease. Because if I walked the streets of Irvine, probably 1 out of 30 would know that it's actually a rare neurological disease. It is not high definition or any other HD that you can come up with in terms of acronyms. So Huntington's disease affects about 30,000 Americans. It is a more popular of the rare diseases, 30,000 Americans symptomatically, but there's another 200,000 who live at risk. It's a genetic disease. If one of your parents has HD, you have a 50-50 chance of inheriting it. So at HDSA, we care for the entire family, knowing that everyone in an HD family has been a caregiver. They know the fear of living at risk and what that means, and then the challenge that we have no disease-modifying therapies yet. So we're working on that. But my job today is to talk about what it means to take care of your organization, and Lalé and I are sort of doing a divide and conquer. I'm going to cover the internal stuff, the kicking the tires of your organization, shall we say, and Lalé's going to take it external. So how do you welcome folks into your organization? The goal is for us to cover our content quickly so that this can really be a workshop, and so that we can have lots of time to take your questions. You all have incredibly valuable experience sustaining and growing your organization, so we want to learn for you, and we want to make sure that that happens as a room. So part one, the internal must-haves to building a sustainable organization. And what's interesting is that the title for this session was Sustaining Your Organization, but everything that you hear us talk about is growth, because we don't believe that in the rare disease fight you can stand still. You have to be prepared to evolve, to welcome new folks into your work, and to be prepared to change as science, technology, and family expectations change. And that's my contact info. Please feel free to send me an email. I did not bring a single business card on this trip. I think that's just an indication of the times. I never bring business cards anymore, but you're all welcome to contact me if you have any specific questions. Everything we do is public as an organization, and I'm happy to share. So first and foremost, when you think about your organization, take a look in the mirror. And sometimes in our work, and I know that I find this all the time, we're running so fast and hard to make a difference that to take a moment to have a retreat with staff and volunteers and think about who you are actually has a feeling of being a new and exciting exercise. So as you think about sustaining your organization and what it's going to take to strengthen and grow your organization, start first by knowing who you are. Look in the mirror and make sure that you can clearly define what your mission and your vision are for your organization. Know who your leadership are. In addition to a board roster, like who are the folks on the board who are really doing the work? Who are the leaders in the field that maybe you need to invite their counsel and consultation? But start looking within. Who are you? Who are you today? And be honest. So it's a SWOT analysis. What are your challenges? What are your opportunities, your threats, and your weaknesses? And importantly, what are your accomplishments? What are you really, really proud of? Because knowing that helps you define yourself. Are you afraid of change? I remember 20 years ago having to read this book, Who Moved My Cheese? How many in the room have read Who Moved My Cheese? Did you hate it as much as I did? It's like not a surprise. You know what the lesson is. It's about, you're a mouse running down a path and someone moves the cheese. And do you find the cheese? Can you evolve? Can you change? So as I said, in the land of patient advocacy, one thing is constant, and that is change. So sustaining your organization means being prepared for that. And internally, it means changes like your culture, your leadership, your people, your needs and your goals. So when you think about sustaining your organization, after you've defined who you are, make sure you're really ready to embark on the change and the growth that your organization or your community might expect, maybe what you dream of. Think about the impact of change on the procedures, the culture of your organization. What does decision-making look like? What's the impact that will happen if you change, even just a little thing? And then, how do you separate your personal connection from the greater good, the mission and the vision that you're trying to accomplish? And this is a really, really hard thing. And I'm actually going to get to this more on the next slide. But it is really important as you're thinking about the sustainability of the organization to make sure that as we're all fighting a family fight, we know the difference between our personal motivations and our collective community family needs and motivations. So, you've done your internal analysis. You've thought about your readiness for change. Now there are 4 simple steps that I'm going to take you through, just as you evaluate your organization and prepare to maintain its sustainability in an ever-changing world. Your board. This is, it's funny because every nonprofit, you have to, when you register, you have to have a board roster. You have to have bylaws and operation rules and all of that. But how often do you really look at that document? So my challenge to you is, if you're thinking about taking your organization to the next level, actually read your bylaws. Are you in compliance with them? Do they sit on a shelf and provide a skeleton that allows you to be an organization, or are they actually guiding who you are as an organization? So our bylaws define our committees. They clearly define the roles of leadership. They talk about how to make decisions. They set expectations for board member engagement. So make sure you've got bylaws that are actually serving the core of your organization. Think about your board members. Think about the board you have today and how that reflects your organization today. And then think about what your organization needs to look like in 10 years. Who do you need on the board to make that organization happen? So at HDSA, a really important quality for change is making sure that we have very clearly defined term limits. So this is a hard process, and it is not always an easy conversation. But the maximum period of time that you can serve on the HDSA National Board is 6 years. And then we kick you off. We do that intentionally. So it's 2 3-year terms. We need to make room for new voices. Our founder, Marjorie Guthrie, knew this. She kicked herself off the board. She changed roles within the organization to make sure that she was protecting against founder syndrome and that the organization was remaining vital and reflective of the needs going on in the community. So take a hard look at your board. That's a hard conversation. I only have a little bit of time, but we could spend hours talking about just that. Succession planning, as part of having term limits, you need to make sure that you're thinking about who's going to be chair of the organization moving forward. So really map that out. At HDSA, you have to be on the board for at least a year before you can be chair-elect. Chair-elect is 2 years, and then you mature into the chair role, which is 2 years. And so there's a very deliberate plan of cultivation and changing of leadership, again, to keep the organization fresh. I know that in smaller communities, that's really hard to maintain. You may have 10 really active volunteers east of the Mississippi. And so are you just rotating the hat among the same 10 people? Maybe. There's no shame in that. But think about the necessary need to pass the ball, even for a short period of time, to make sure that you avoid volunteer burnout and that you allow new folks to share their experiences. Committees, I talked about the bylaws really defining committees. Committees are another really important way to help protect against burnout. And then to staff or not to staff. How many organizations, well, of the organizations represented in this room, how many of you have paid professional staff? Congratulations. That is a huge decision. There's so often the inclination to hold really, really tight to the dollars that you raise and the volunteers who have worked so hard to bring in those dollars. But at what point, for the good of the organization, are you bringing in professional services? How big an organization do you need to be to bring on a professional staff person? And for every community, there's a different threshold to that. But that's a huge decision that when you're taking that internal look, when you're thinking about board leadership, it's also the time to think about staff leadership. Your systems. It's the really boring stuff. This is the paperwork. So do you have the accountants and the auditors lined up? Are they volunteering their time? Do you have to pay them? Do you know what the regulations are in your state? Check with your attorney general. Every state is different. It is mind-numbing, the amount of time that as a nonprofit we could spend on paperwork. But it is important that once a year, you're kicking those tires and you're making sure that you have checked this really boring stuff. Do you have a conflict of interest policy? Do you have a whistleblower policy? I'm in New York City, and if we don't have these 3 documents, conflict of interest, whistleblower, and document retention, we're done for. And I know that on 990s now on the federal level, at least conflict of interest is a requirement, and they're continuing to add more of these fundamental systems to make sure that the integrity of your organization is sound. And as a result, as you think through these items, it allows you to grow. And then IRS expectations related to donor acknowledgement. Making sure that you're thanking people and that you're thanking people along with IRS expectations. Every single dollar that's given to your organization is powering the work that you do. So you want to make sure that you're thanking everybody. That's how you're going to grow. It's also what's going to keep your credibility and integrity in the public space really high. So again, there could be an entire session on how to thank people, but remember, look at those systems. Okay, so you've looked at your leadership. You've looked at the boring policies and paperwork type of stuff. Now, let's think about your work. Does your organization have a plan? Have you defined what you're doing, even before you know where you're going? Evaluate your environment, set your goals, plan to achieve them, and then measure the outcomes. And I'm going to quickly click forward. I know someone was taking a picture of these slides. Happy to share the slides. And they're on the app. But I'm a paper person. Like, there's so many ways that I like my information more than apps. I always say that, well, so don't hope, wish, don't wish, plan, don't plan, do. We're not going to cure Huntington's disease on hopes alone. We have to act. We have to follow through. And to do that, I want a plan. So when I think about navigating, just generally in the world, you have to know where you are and where you're going to so that you can map the route between the 2 dots. And if you've looked in the mirror and you've done some of that behind-the-scenes stuff so you know where you are and you have a sense of where you want to go, your strategic plan can be that map. So that's why at HDSA we have a strategic plan. It was developed by the Board of Trustees. It was done in unison with the community through excessive surveys. Not excessive, a lot of really meaningful surveys. But you know, we every time we had a different draft, we put it out there. We wanted feedback. And when it started to be clear that the community was tired of looking at the document, we were done. So I do think we went a little on the excessive side because we wanted to make sure we covered everybody. But then we made sure that we have a plan that we can actually act upon. And then, once you have that plan, communicate, communicate, communicate. Talk about what you're doing. And it's on this note that I'm going to pass it over to Lalé to talk about the external stuff. As public nonprofits, everything you're doing internally is also externally, and everything you do externally has to have the internal structure, has to have that skeleton behind it. So in so many ways, our work is symbiotic, and there are 2 halves to this presentation that are just one. But now I'm going to pass it over to my co-presenter to take us the rest of the circle, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Louise. Guys, I can see that we're almost getting close to happy hour. I promise to make this quick and fun. Thank you so much. And also, I want Nancy Lurie, my right arm. Where are you, Nancy? Could you stand up for a second? Because this is going to be, where? You're already standing up. She's in the back. I am going to give out gift certificates for C's Candy. So for people who have answers to my questions. So give Nancy your card and you will have your candy. But just before I start, I know that, and the light was in my eyes, so I couldn't really see. Louise had a lot of the similar information that I'm also going to sort of skip through, which was fantastic. But she also asked how many people here had paid staff, and I couldn't quite make it out. So could you please raise your hands if you're representing an organization that has paid staff? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10. Ooh. Nearly half of you. That's amazing, because I have to tell you a little bit about my background and why that's a pet peeve for me. This is my third career. For the past 12 years, all I've done is consult nonprofits and show them how to operate like a regular for-profit organization with all the encumbrances of a nonprofit in the IRS. Before that, I was an executive in Silicon Valley early on, so I got lucky. And before that, I was in the film industry. So one thing I have been able to do is sort of tie the technology that we're all experiencing right now, because we're, again, at a time of accelerating change based on this technology, and how to be able to pivot with that. Louise addressed the importance of being able to expect change, but I'm saying the kind of change we've experienced in the last 50 years, we're going to experience in the next few years, and then that much more quickly moving forward. So the one thing you have to prepare for is to unlearn a whole bunch of stuff that you think is right, shibboleths, belief systems that no longer, serve you well, and replace those with new things. And you have to do that over and over again, and that's the biggest challenge for a lot of people. But if you're open to that, that's huge. Can I also have a show of hands how many founders we have in the room that are still, and how many of you founders are with the people who keep your hand raised if you're also pulling a paycheck? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not that many. Okay, that's great. That's good. And how many of you are just executive directors? No? How many here from industry? Okay, I just want to get a sense of who I'm talking to so that I can tailor a lot of my talk to answer your questions. So 4 years ago, I joined NDF, the Neuromuscular Disease Foundation, and they went from having had a board of directors and only volunteers for 10 years. They had managed to raise $1 million and had that sitting in an account, had never agreed on paying anyone, and could not find enough scientists to work on a rare disease. That was a huge issue for them, and it was surprising to me. So what they wanted us to do was to go ahead and find scientists and places and people, and it was much more difficult than you might think, trying to convince a postdoc to take that kind of work on. 4 years later, and they were serving one zip code in Los Angeles, basically. 4 years later, with just one other staff member and 2 patient advocates that work with us, we have gone from one zip code country to presence in 23 different countries, and gone from $500,000 a year to, if everything goes well this year, $5 million a year. And that I can show you how to do that too. So the main message today is it's not about having answers, because I didn't know anything about science. You heard about my background. The right way to move forward is to have the right questions, okay? It's not about the answers. And so everything on here you're going to see are the right questions to be asking. In terms of looking in the mirror that Louise addressed, the main thing is, how will the world be better off if you succeed? This might sound obvious, but I promise you, you have to learn to articulate that And in meetings like this, where you have chance encounters with people maybe from biotech with much deeper pockets than you have, industry, you need to be able to articulate that very, very quickly. If you can't say it in less than 30 seconds, you need to go back and answer that question. Who will benefit directly and immediately? A lot of people will say patients, but please think beyond that. Patients, their family members, the scientists that you're funding, the community maybe, try to think beyond the obvious. And then who will benefit indirectly or over time? And most importantly, how will you measure the real success? You have to measure your impact, but it's obviously beyond how many patients you helped, but like what is other creative ways that you can measure this and have that decided early on before you get there, and then at best it's a break-even proposition because, you sort of did what you did and you won't get any kudos, I promise you. And then what corporations and foundations and individuals are a natural fit for your cause? This might sound obvious too, but the people that you're going to get funding from, no matter how much you can raise on your own, and with rare patients, let's face it, the only donors you're going to get are friends and family and stakeholders related to those patients. So what you have to do is make yourself attractive to corporations and industry that will also benefit from your cause. In this case, this is our board members on the top and some of our volunteers, and our patients and stakeholders on the bottom. Annually, we put on a symposium, but you have to think about how are you going to bring these people together, and from that, how are you going to harness the energy that you create in a situation like that to really make it explode into something that does have impact and can be measured. And I promise you, we didn't go from $500,000 a year to 5 million without creating an important feeling at our symposiums annually and get them to become larger and larger and larger and do better exponentially. And then you have to think about what's in it for the person you're trying to persuade to pay for this stuff. Let's face it. How many of you here are at a pivotal point where you kind of need more funding? What's your pain point? Almost everyone. Is there someone, this is going to be the first C's Candy. Can anyone tell me what is their pain point if it's not money? Where are you stuck? Anyone? Yeah. Finding the right scientists. So kind of where I was 4 years ago. Did you have? Volunteers and then keeping them organized. And you have a comment? Okay, so where to go strategically next? Okay, Nancy, we want these people's, give us your business cards, you're gonna get candy. We're gonna address all of those with Louise afterwards. So those are great questions, but if you're looking at money, which is most of you, where you kind of need to raise the bar for that, you really have to try and think about what's in it for these people that we are trying to bring in. And let me tell you, I can only start with the example that I have done at NDF. When we realize that we want to go gene therapy, everyone's talking about gene therapy, and patients who are notoriously impatient, they want us to do gene therapy yesterday. And they keep saying, when are you going to start gene therapy? And you're like, well, we kind of have, because all these studies that we're doing are going to bolster the opportunity to do gene therapy. I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to have your genes modified in some way. You only get one shot at this. Do you really want to be dosed with something before we know everything that we could possibly know? I'll tell you what, if it was my kid, I wouldn't allow it. And so we are doing everything possible. So that is all part of gene therapy. But when you look at the expense of gene therapy, which could be upwards of $100 million, there's no way that a small foundation or a nonprofit can pay for that. You're going to have to partner with a biotech. You're going to have to partner with someone who's got the same mission and interest as you, and you're going to have to persuade them. Now, I can tell you that biotechs, I've been talking to them, they must have 20 people a day asking them to look at their disease. How are you going to make yourself attractive to them? It's sort of like dating. They think of them as the pretty girl and you as the sort of homely, pudgy guy. And you're going to have to make yourself attractive. So way that we did that was to say, hey, We can raise maybe 5 million, and we will mitigate your losses, potentially. We will fund everything and bring you data up until phase 1, pre-IND, IND, phase 1. And then from there, if you give us the guidance, tell us what vectors to use, who's the PI you prefer, then you can take it from there. So basically, we've absorbed your losses, you stand to gain everything, and we've kind of done it your way so we don't have to go back and redo a lot of that work. So that's a specific example of how we did that at NDF. And I'm happy when we get to the Q&A part to address any of your specific ways to make that happen, because it's going to be personalized for each of you. And so, yeah, and so it's a matter of persuasion. It's a matter of, this isn't about trying to be a used car salesperson. You don't need to have that. If you follow the questions that I put up there, and you can actually have real answers to them, it's going to be a natural fit. It's not going to be difficult for you to persuade people that you have the same mission, you have their for-profit, your non-profit, they will trust. There's an element of trust. You have the patient data, which is very, very valuable. You have the trust of the patients, also very valuable. And if you can seed round the first part of it, and they, with their guidance, use the kind of vectors and the kinds of things that they want to use, or the kind of work that they want to do, then it makes sense that they will want to. You've got something they want, they've got something you want, and it's a natural quid pro quo. And so one of so three sets of candy is already out. We want that. But I guess this is where I'm going to ask Louise to join me, and we're going to take questions from you guys specific to your pain points. Of the people that raised their hands and said that money was where they were stuck right now, that's the largest group in the room. Would someone like to give us a specific example of where they're stuck, and have you really thought about these questions? Who wants to go? Over there, question.
So we've recently launched our foundation, and our biggest concern now is keeping the momentum going.
Okay.
So we've hit a tremendous peak, but our worry is that it won't stay at that level.
Can I ask you what you do and what do you?
So our 4-year-old son has been diagnosed with a rare disease.
Uh-huh.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
I'll let my wife explain.
So he's been diagnosed with a rare disease, but he hasn't shown symptoms of it yet because we were privileged enough to have been directed to go and do whole exome sequencing ahead of time.
Perfect.
But we need to find something before he does show symptoms. So we're really in a rush to get a certain amount of money and to rush research, which can only be rushed so much. So we have reached a fairly good amount of money in a short period of time. But the question is how to keep those people engaged long term, where they don't say, oh, I don't want to listen to this anymore. Oh, I've heard this story too many times.
And are these people donors, or are they people who also, like you, have affected?
They're all donors.
members?
Unfortunately, our child is one of now 5 in the U.S. So
I see.
It's really pretty much just us doing it.
Right. And have you been able to find doctors or
we
scientists?
have doctors. We have actually 2 labs that we've already started funding ourselves out of our own pockets.
Right.
So all of that is done, but to maintain paying them, we don't have the $5 million that they're going to need over time.
Right.
So
Right.
we need to get the funding and to make sure we can sustain the research we have going.
So congratulations on having the momentum that you have right now. So much of keeping families and donors involved is thanking them, making sure that you're not just asking. So use the opportunity to communicate to them regularly and involve them in the slowness of science, because it takes too damn long. So making sure that your donors, who have the high expectations that you have, understand that you're doing everything you can. But I think something that we've learned is that you grow by not just moving forward, but also by circling back and keeping everybody engaged. And that's one strategy that's worked for us. Love to hear from others if anyone else in the room has advice. How do you keep that momentum if you're doing everything that you're doing?
as we're coming up with people who might want to volunteer to that answer, I would just add that honestly, what you have done right now is beyond impressive, because typically people only give if they have someone who's affected, and you've probably reached out to your immediate network of friends and families. My suggestion is reach out to those other 5 people in the country and form an alliance, because there's precious few of us within our individual diseases, and these kinds of fractured attempts and working in silos will never get you anywhere. I'm sure the other 5 people's parents are also trying to do what they can. Perhaps they haven't raised as much as you. But getting them on board and exponentially reaching out to all the stakeholders that they have or the people that they have will also help you get a bigger amount of money. A press release, for example, won't cost you hardly anything if you're willing to write one. You get that out there and get your name mentioned in a few places, your donors will thank you, because everybody wants to be on a winning team. So you have to, one of the pieces of advice I give that's hard for a lot of people to hear, and I apologize in advance if it sounds insensitive, but stop with the woe is me and start with look at the achievements we've made. Count your blessings. This is what we've got. Because of you, we've able to come from this point to this point. Because honestly, even though it might be the saddest thing in the world, people just don't have the bandwidth for that. And you have to realize that there's different levels of engagement. My suggestion is really keep counting every little bit that you do and keep letting them know that you've made these advances, you've made this progress, and people will continue to want to be on your team. But definitely reach out to those 5 families. Does anybody have a solution for them besides us? No? Okay. Next question.
More questions. Right here, Christine.
I'm curious, when you talked about getting a biotech firm interested and raising $5 million to give to them, what is your recommendation, or what did you do in terms of with that agreement? Did you ask for royalties if they're successful? Did you ask for a warrant, or did you just say, we just want to give you this money, we don't care in really getting a financial return from it?
The quick answer is yes. The quick answer is that when we try to, you've got sometimes only 2 seconds when you're at these kinds of events to say, listen, we've got the money, we've got the data, we need your feedback. You don't talk about any of those details. When you get to that place, absolutely, and you've got lawyers involved and they're engaged and you've lured them in, that's when you say, listen, ad infinitum, it'd be great if you could give us some royalties that will keep our programs going forever. But, really, again, this is my thesis, is that a nonprofit is really no different than a for-profit, and only that's just that much harder to run because you've got all these constraints. So, the difference is that instead of passing that money on to your shareholders, you're passing it on to your beneficiaries. So, I would then absolutely get involved with that conversation. But I think that's sort of 2 and 3 meetings down the road. Yeah, does that answer your question? I would come back with, trust me, if you do this right and you use us as a blueprint, you can do this with every nonprofit in the world. If they have nothing to lose and everything to gain by everybody in this room going to them and saying, I will take the hit on the initial expense and mitigate your losses. And if this is something that you find attractive, then you can take it from there. They have to be fools to say no. I swear, I'll come with you to that meeting, because there's no way I could hear a person who's trained to make money for their company come back with that as a no. And then the other thing that you might want to paint for them is the picture of how many more diseases will be helped. Like in our case, we work on G&E myopathy, which is a form of muscular dystrophy. And my argument to them is, guys, I get it. It's a numbers game. I get it that maybe max there's 30,000 people with this disease in the world, and we haven't found 5,000 of them, okay? But the truth is that if we can apply some of what we've learned to other muscle diseases, the rare disease isn't rare, right? And so there's a lot of money. And just appeal to their sense of greed. Go back to that slide where I said, figure out what's in it for them, and then just keep reiterating
I would also push them to be serious. If they're whining, about risks and potential competition, and, well, are we really going to do this with you? We're waiting. It's like waiting for another dance partner. Sometimes you You take what's in front of you. All right.
Yeah. He's just not that
Not for
Indian.
nothing. Yeah, he's not that homely and short and pudgy. So
We have a question from online. It says, from a record-keeping standpoint for those smaller organizations, are you using an accountant or QuickBooks or some other type of resource to remain compliant and track donors?
Do you want to take that one, Louise?
yeah, so I'll start. There are a ton of systems, expensive and inexpensive. You can use Excel. You can start small, really. As you get bigger, having a system like QuickBooks that might integrate with your database can be really, really important. But it doesn't matter what platform you use, as long as you are doing the work of keeping the information. And that's really what we've seen as our organization has grown. It's great to be able to make decisions and choose vendors and products that will evolve with you as you grow, but you have to start somewhere. It's okay to keep all your donor information on index cards, as long as they're well managed.
That's a big if.
Yeah.
But yeah, my suggestion is go professional as soon as you can afford it.
Very much. My question is, I'm a founder of a very small nonprofit, just founded at the beginning of January. My daughter is affected with a very rare condition, and the biggest problem I'm finding is I'm a patient advocate. I support families. However, our community is scattered internationally, and as of late, we're very fractured. And I'm getting pulled from all different countries as to where funding should be attributed. And I want to stay out of the fray. I have my own personal opinions as to where funding should be donated. However, I'm a patient support person. I don't want to impose my opinions on research. However, at the same time, I feel like I'm very well educated on current research, whereas I see in the communities there is a lot of conflicting information. How do I navigate that where I can provide a safe area where people can discuss things and parents aren't bamboozled?
Yeah, so that's really, really, really hard. There are two things that come to mind. So one approach might be make sure that your mission is big enough so that there's room under the umbrella. So if you can all agree that your goal is to help families affected by X condition, you might all have different approaches to it, but allow the breathing room for the disagreement as long as you all know what that common thing is. In most disease spaces, there are multiple organizations working for on one issue. They're going to have different ways of doing it, but at the end of the day, on the mission stuff, we can all agree that we're trying to do what's in the best interest of our families. The other way that I think to answer the question, and this is what we use at HDSA, is to have an advisory board that doesn't have any stake in the game. So I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor. I don't make decisions about the doctors that we fund or the scientists that we fund. We have a group of peer reviewers who are not conflicted, and if they are, they step out of the room when that group is talked about, that can provide unbiased feedback on where the money should go. And that's hard the smaller and smaller your condition becomes, but there are still people, even in related conditions, so another genetic disease that might be similar, who can provide their expertise to give you cover, so you're not the scientist, so you're gonna let the scientists help you decide where the funding should go. Then the challenge is getting everyone to agree that you can't be betting on your own horse. You've got to have somebody else who's evaluating the field at play. Do you have thoughts?
I do. I want to, first of all, congratulate you for stepping up because that's huge. And that's, you're a founder, and you should be more confident in your voice. And like Louise said, you don't have to be a doctor or a scientist to say, look, this is my process. I know that at NDF, what we have is a scientific advisory committee that grows each year as you find more and more doctors to work with, but bring them on and get them to evaluate anonymously any proposals or ideas that come forward. And then once that happens, they are not the decision makers. It's your board of directors that then has to vote on that. And you should be, I would think, as if you're acting as the executive director as well as the founder, you should be the person who kind of puts that in lay terms and takes it to, or find someone else who can do that, and explain that to your board, that this is what it's going to cost. These are the two proposals we have. We can go this direction or we can go this direction. Obviously, it would be great to be able to do both. We can't afford it. Which way should we do? What is our strategy for moving forward? And ask the scientists the hard questions. Scientists, I can assure you, do not always remember about patients. I'm sorry to say that. They don't always remember. And it's, look, they're human too, and they have cognitive biases, and they want to keep their labs going, and they've got their own ideas. So don't always take everything they say for granted. Take a look at what you understand, what your planning has told you you need to go. Where do you want to end up? Work backwards, and what's going to get you there. And continue to get the advice of other people.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Subject, but I was wondering if there are any other people here from rare blood disease, non-inherited.
There's a lady over here.
And if
She's
so,
not sure.
Non-genetic? You mean non-genetic?
Yeah, not non-genetic.
Oh, she's genetic. All right.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I always feel like the one that's ending the fun. But there will be time for questions if both of you have given their information to help
Yeah.
answer questions.
And those of you who answered questions, bring your cards and we'll send you some candy, please.
Thank you all.
Thank
Have
you,
a great
everyone.
rest of the conference.
Louise and Lalé for sharing your expertise and experience. At this time, as you head out into your networking event sponsored by Audentis, take a second to go on the mobile app and do our survey for this session, and make sure that you check out the agenda for the rest of the sessions that are continuing on today. Thanks, everybody.